Hello, my fellow unicorns. Today I'm going to read more scary stories to tell in the dark. If you've been following my series on this, the last time I finished the first book, which is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, but now I'm going to read from the second book. Let's get started. Okay, let's read the beginning of this chapter. When she saw him, she screamed and ran. This chapter is filled with ghost stories. In one, a man has just become a ghost, but he doesn't know it yet. In another, a pirate ship and crew return from a watery grave. And there are other frightful events. This story is called Something Was Wrong. One morning, John Sullivan found himself walking along a street downtown. He could not explain what he was doing there, or how he got there, or where he had been earlier. He didn't even know what time it was. He saw a woman walking toward him and stopped her. "I'm afraid I forgot my watch," he said and smiled. "Can you tell me the time?" When she saw him, she screamed and ran. Then, John Sullivan noticed that other people were afraid of him. When they saw him coming, they flattened themselves against a building or ran across the street to stay out of his way. "There must be something wrong with me," John Sullivan thought. "I'd better go home." He hailed a taxi, but the driver took one look at him and sped away. John Sullivan did not understand what was going on, and it scared him. "Maybe somebody at home can come and get me," he thought. He found a telephone and called his wife, but a voice he did not recognize answered. "Is Mrs. Sullivan there?" he asked. "No, she's at a funeral," the voice said. "Mr. Sullivan was killed yesterday in an accident downtown." Here we have an illustration of John Sullivan making the phone call. It's very eerie. The wreck. Fred and Jan went to the same high school, but they met for the first time at the Christmas dance. Fred had come by himself, and so had Jan. Soon Fred decided that Jan was one of the nicest girls he had ever met. They danced together most of the evening. At 11 o'clock, Jan said, "I have to leave now. Can you give me a ride?" "Sure," he said. "I've got to go home too." "I accidentally drove my car into a tree on my way over here," Jan said. "I guess I wasn't paying attention." Fred drove her to the head of Brady Road. It was in a neighborhood he didn't know very well. "Why don't you drop me off here?" Jan said. "The road up ahead is in a really bad condition. I can walk from here." Fred stopped the car and held out some tinsel. "Have some," he said. "I got it at the dance." "Thank you," she said. "I'll put it in my hair." And she did. "Would you like to go out sometime to a movie or something?" Fred asked. "That would be fun," Jan said. After Fred drove off, he realized that he did not know Jan's last name or her telephone number. "I'll go back," he thought. "The road can't be that bad." He drove slowly down Brady Road through a thick woods, but there wasn't a sign of Jan. As he came around a curve, he saw the wreckage of a car ahead. It had crashed into a tree and caught fire. Smoke was still rising from it. As Fred made his way to the car, he could see someone trapped inside, crushed against the steering column. It was Jan, and her hair was the Christmas tinsel he had given her. Look at that. So creepy. This next one is called One Sunday morning, Ida always went to the 7 o'clock Sunday morning service at her church. Usually she heard the clanging of the church bells while she was eating breakfast, but this morning she heard them while she was still in bed. That means I'm late, she thought. Ida jumped out of bed, quickly dressed, and left without eating or looking at the clock. It was still dark outside, but it was usually dark at this time of year. Ida was the only one on the street. The only sounds she heard were the clatter of her shoes on the pavement. Everybody must already be in church, she thought. Ida took a shortcut through the cemetery, then she quietly slipped into the church and found a seat. The service had already begun. When she caught her breath, Ida looked around. The church was filled with people she had never seen before. But the woman next door did look familiar. Ida smiled at her. It's Josephine Kerr, she thought. But she's dead. She died a month ago. Suddenly, Ida felt uneasy. She looked around again. As her eyes began to adjust to the dim light, Ida saw some skeletons in suits and dresses. This is a service for the dead, Ida thought. Everybody here is dead, except me. Ida noticed that some of them were staring at her. They looked angry, as if she had no business there. Josephine Kerr leaned toward her and whispered, "Leave right after the benediction if you care for your life." When the service came to an end, the minister gave his blessing. "The Lord bless you and keep you," he said. "The Lord make his face to shine upon you." Ida grabbed her coat and walked quickly toward the door. When she heard footsteps behind her, she glanced back. Several of the dead were coming toward her. Others were getting up to join them. "The Lord lift up his countenance to you," the minister went on. Ida was so frightened she began to run. Out the door she ran, with a pack of shrieking ghosts at her heels. "Get out," one of them screamed. Another shouted, "You don't belong here," and ripped her coat away. As Ida ran through the cemetery, a third grabbed the hat from her head. "Don't come back," it screamed, and shook its arm at her. By the time Ida reached the street, the sun was rising and the dead had disappeared. Did this really happen, Ida asked herself, or had I been dreaming? That afternoon, one of Ida's friends brought over her coat and hat, or what was left of them. They had been found in the cemetery, torn to shreds. Oh, this one's about the pirate ship. It's called A Weird Blue Light. Late one night in October 1864, a Confederate blockade runner slipped by some Union gunboats at the entrance to Galveston Bay in Texas and made it safely to port with its cargo of food and other necessities. Lewis Billings, the master of the small vessel, was getting ready to weigh anchor when he was startled by a shriek from one of the crew. A strange, old-fashioned schooner with a big black flag was rushing down at us, Billings said later. She was afire with a sort of weird, pale blue light that lighted up every nook and cranny of her. The crew was pulling at the ropes and doing other work, and they paid us no attention. They didn't even glance our way. They all had ghastly, bleeding wounds, but their faces and eyes were those of dead men. The man who had shrieked had fallen to his knees, his teeth clattering as he gasped out a prayer. Overcoming my own terror, that was chilling the very marrow of my bones, I rushed forward, shouting to the others as I ran. Suddenly the schooner vanished before my eyes. Some say it was the ghost of Jean Lafitte's pirate ship, Pride, that sank off Galveston Island in 1821 or 1822. She was seen again in 1892 in the same waters with the same crew. This one's called Somebody Fell from a Loft. I had signed on as an ordinary seaman from the Falls of Ettrick, a merchant ship bound for England. The first time I saw that ship, I knew her right away. She was the old Gertrude Spurshoe. I had sailed on her years before when she was painted brown and gold. Now she was painted black and had a new name, but it was the same ship for sure. We had a pretty good crew for that voyage, except for one hard-looking ticket named McLaren. He was a pretty good seaman, but there was something about him that I didn't trust. He was kind of secretive, kept mostly to himself. One day, somebody told him that I worked on the old Gertrude. For some reason, he got all tremble over that. Then I catched him giving me all these ugly black looks as if he was itching to knife me in the back. I guess it had something to do with the Gertrude, but I didn't know what. Well, this one day, we was trying to work our way through the dripping black fog. You'd scarcely know we had all the lights on, and it was dead calm. There wasn't a breath of fresh air. The ship just lay there wallowing its trough a-trollin' and a-rollin' and going nowhere. I was standing my watch around midships, and McLaren was doing his trick at the wheel. The rest of the crew was scattered around one place and another. It was as quiet as could be. Then all at once, whacko! This thing hits the deck right in front of McLaren. He lets go a screech that turns my blood cold, and he falls down in a faint. The second mate starts yelling that somebody has fallen from aloft. Laying out there just forward of the wheel was someone, or something, dressed in oilskins, with blood oozing out from underneath. The captain ran and fetched a big light from his cabin so we could see who it was. They kind of straightened him out to get a good look at his face. He was a big, ugly-looking devil, but nobody knew who he was or what he was doing up there. At least nobody was saying. When McLaren came to from his faint, they tried to get something out of him. All he did was jabber away and keep rolling those big, wild-looking eyes of his. Everybody was getting more and more excited. We all wanted to heave the body overboard as quick as we could, but there was something weird about it, as if it wasn't real. But the captain wasn't so sure about getting rid of it that way. Could it be a stowaway, he asked? But the ship was so filled with lumber we were carrying there was no space where a living thing could hide for 3 weeks, which is how long we've been out. Even if it was a stowaway, what was it doing aloft on such a dirty day? There was no reason for anyone to be up there. There was nothing to see. Finally, the captain gave up and told us to heave him overboard. Then nobody would touch him. The mate ordered us to pick him up, but nobody made a move. Then he tried coaxing, but it didn't do any good. Suddenly, that loony McLaren starts yelling, "I handled him once, I can handle him again." He picks up the body and staggers over the railing with it. He is just about to throw it overboard when it wraps its 2 big long arms around him, and they go together, and over they go together. Then on the way down, one of them starts laughing in a horrible way. The mates are yelling to launch a boat, but nobody would get into a boat, not on a night like that. We threw a couple of life preserves after them, but everybody knew they wouldn't help. So that was that. Or was it? The first chance I had to go home after that, I went right over to see the old Captain Spurshoe, who was captain when Gertrude was around. Well, he says, one trip these two outlandish men shipped aboard the Gertrude. One was McLaren, the other was a really big fella. The big one was always picking on McLaren and thumping him around, and McLaren was always talking about how we would get back at him. Well, this wet, dirty night, the two of them was up there alone, and the big one come flying down, killed himself, deader than a herring. McLaren says the foot rope they were using parted and he almost fell himself. But everybody who saw that rope knew she didn't give away on her own. She had been cut through with a knife. After that, whenever we came to port, McLaren thought we were going to get the police after him, and he got pretty scared. But we couldn't prove anything, so we didn't try. In the end, I guess the big fella took care of things in his own way. If he was a ghost that came back, that's what he was. If there'd be things like ghosts. This one's called The Little Black Dog. Billy Mansfield said that the little black dog followed him wherever he went, but he was the only one who saw it, so people thought he was kind of crazy. To drive the dog away, Billy was always hollering at it, throwing rocks at it, but the dog always came back. The first time Billy saw that dog was the day he fought Silas Burton. Billy was just a young man then, but the Burtons and Billy's family had been feuding for years. When Billy saw Silas riding toward him, he went for his gun, and Burton went for his, but Billy fired first. He hit Burton in the back, knocking him from his horse. Burton's horse ran off, and his gun fell where he couldn't reach it. He lay there on the ground pleading with Billy. Not to kill him, but Billy killed him anyway. Burton's little black dog was with him when he was shot. The dog kept licking Burton's face and barking and snarling at Billy. In his anger, Billy killed the dog too. There wasn't much law enforcement in those days, so Billy wasn't arrested. But all that night he heard Burton's dog outside his cabin, scratching its door and barking to be let in. I'm imagining this, Billy said to himself. I shot that dog. It's dead. But the next morning, Billy saw the dog. It was waiting for him outside. From then on, there was not a day when he didn't see it. And there wasn't a night where he didn't hear it scratching on his door, barking to be let in. From then on, Billy was always finding black dog hairs on the sofa, on the floor, in his bed, even in his food, and the house and the yard stank of dog. That's what Billy said. Whenever somebody told him there wasn't any dog to see, he'd say, maybe you don't see it, but I do, and I'm not any crazier than you are. Things went on like that for many years. Then one morning, in the middle of the winter, the neighbors didn't see any smoke coming out of Billy's chimney. When they went over to check, Billy wasn't there. A day or so later, they found his body lying in the snow in a field back of his cabin. Billy had plenty of enemies, and at first it seemed like somebody might have killed him. But there wasn't a mark on his body, and there weren't any footprints out there except for Billy's. The doctor said Billy probably died of old age, but there was something odd about his death. When the neighbors found Billy, there were black dog hairs on his clothes. There were even a few on his face, smelled like a dog had been out there, yet no one had seen a dog anywhere. This next one's called Clinkety Clink. An old lady got sick and died. She had no family and no close friends, so the neighbors got a grave digger to dig a grave for her, and they had a coffin made and they placed it in her living room. As was the tradition, they washed her body and dressed her up in her best clothes and put her in the coffin. When she died, her eyes were wide open, staring at everything and seeing nothing. The neighbors found 2 old silver dollars on her dresser, and they put them on her eyelids to keep them closed. They lit candles and sat up with her so that she would not be too lonely on the first night that she was dead. The next morning, a preacher came and said a prayer for her. Then everybody went home. Later, the gravedigger arrived to take her to the cemetery and bury her. He stared at the silver dollars on her eyes, and he picked them up. How shiny and smooth they were, how thick and heavy. They're beautiful, he thought, just beautiful. He looked at the dead woman with her eyes wide open, but felt she was staring at him, watching him hold her coins. It gave him a creepy feeling. He put the coins back on those eyes of hers to keep them closed. But before he knew it, his hands reached out again and grabbed the coins and stuck them in his pocket. Then he grabbed a hammer and quickly nailed shut the lid on the coffin. "Now you can't see anything," he said to her. Then he took her out to the cemetery and he buried her as fast as he could. When the gravedigger got home, he put the 2 silver dollars in a tin box and shook it. The coins made a cheerful, rattling sound, but the gravedigger wasn't feeling cheerful. He couldn't forget those eyes staring at him. When it got dark, a storm came up and the wind started blowing. It blew all around the house. It came in through the cracks and around the windows and down the chimney. Basoo, it went. Busy, busy, basoo. The fire flared and flickered. The gravedigger threw some fresh wood on the fire, got into bed, and pulled the blankets up to his chin. The wind kept blowing. Basoo, it went. Busy, busy, basoo. The fire flared and flickered and cast evil-looking shadows on the walls. The gravedigger lay there thinking about the dead woman's eyes staring at him. The wind blew stronger and louder, and the fire flared and flickered, and popped and snapped, and he got more and more scared. Suddenly, he heard another sound. Clinkety clink, clinkety clink, it went. Clinkety clink, clinkety clink. It was the silver dollars rattling in the tin box. "Hey," the gravedigger shouted, "who's taking my money?" But all he heard was the wind blowing. Busy, busy, basoo. And the flames flaring and flickering and snapping and popping and the coins going clinkety clink, clinkety clink. He leaped out of bed and chained up the door. Then he hurried back, but his head had barely touched the pillow when he heard clinkety clink, clinkety clink. Then he heard something way off in the distance. It was a voice crying, "Where is my money? Who's got my money? Who? Who? And the wind blew, busy, busy, pursue. And the fire flared and flickered and snapped and popped, and the money went clickety-clink, clinkety-clink. The gravedigger was really scared. He got out of bed again and pulled all the furniture against the door and put a heavy iron skillet over the tin box. Then he jumped back into bed and covered his head with the blankets. But the money rattled louder than ever, and way off a voice cried, "Give me my money. Who's got my money? Who? Who?" And the wind blew, and the fire flared and flickered and snapped and popped, and the gravedigger shivered and shook and cried, "Oh, Lordy, Lordy." Suddenly, the front door flew open, and in walked the ghost of the dead woman, with her eyes wide open, staring at everything and seeing nothing. And the wind blew, busy, busy, bazoo. And the money went clinkety-clink, clinkety-clink. And the fire flared and flickered and snapped and popped, and the ghost of the dead woman cried, "Oh, where is my money? Who's got my money? Who? Who?" And the gravedigger moaned, "Oh, Lordy, Lordy." The ghost could hear money going clinkety-clink, clinkety-clink in the tin box, but her dead eyes couldn't see the box, so she reached out with her arms and tried to find it. So now, the story gives you instructions. As you tell the story, stand up with your arms in front of you and begin groping around you. The wind went busy, busy, bazoo, and the money rattled clickety-clink, clinkety-clink, and the fire flared and flickered and snapped and popped, and the gravedigger shivered and shook and moaned, "Oh, Lordy, Lordy." And the woman cried, "Give me my money. Who's got my money? Who? Who?" Now quickly jump at someone in the audience and scream, "You've got it." So this was the first chapter of more scary stories to tell in the dark. These are really fun ghost stories. I love them. They're nice and creepy. And I absolutely love the illustrations. I hope this brings back fond memories of your childhood, or if you're hearing these stories for the first time, I hope they put you in a really fun, spooky mood for the holiday season. Thank you guys so much for watching.